everybody. Thank you so much for joining the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, AANPHI, as we discuss the 2016 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Policy Platform. This is Mary Tablante, the Communications Associate for AANPHI. Just as a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You may enter your questions using the question box if you are in the webinar, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. So now let's start off with our AANPHI National Director, Christopher Kang. Chris?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks to everybody for joining us today to talk about the 2016 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Policy Platform. I'm really honored and delighted to be joined by Representative Judy Chu, who, as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, not only knows our policy priorities, but really fights for them every day in Congress and beyond. And we'll also be joined by Christine Chen, who is Executive Director of APIA Vote, which is a member of AANPHI and really is leading the nationwide civic engagement work. The National Council of Asian Pacific Americans was founded in 1996 as a coalition of National Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander organizations. And today we're a coalition of 35 groups. We strive for equity and justice by organizing our diverse strengths to influence policy and shape public narratives. Since 2004, AANPHI began issuing a policy platform every 4 years to discuss our policy priorities and recommendations related to our communities. Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing racial group in the country. As many of you know, there are more immigrants coming from Asian countries than from Hispanic ones, and that we're the fastest growing electorate. And yet, our community's priorities are not very well understood. This leads us to being misportrayed or mischaracterized in stereotypes, whether it's the so-called positive stereotype known as the model minority myth, which actually has some very detrimental impacts on our communities, I'll talk about in a moment, or whether it's negative stereotypes like the perpetual foreigner stereotype that I think we saw play out most recently in the O'Reilly Factor segment on Fox News. The good news is that we're starting to break through, and Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders are starting to see ourselves more in the media coverage. I think there's been a lot of coverage, in particular over the last week or two, with the National Asian American Survey being released. This sort of shows our polling attitudes and shows that a great number of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders are moving from identifying either as independents or as Republicans to much more identification as Democrats. And really the next step, we believe, in sort of the coverage and understanding of our community is really understanding the policies that we support and the recommendations that we make. In this policy platform, it sort of opens with this broad theme that we demand to be seen, to be heard, and to have a seat at the table. And what that seeks to do is encompass these three cross-cutting priorities that really affect every aspect of public policy. The first one that we demand to be seen is a call for more data that captures Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. All too often, there's not enough data about us in government or in public life. Sometimes we're described as other if our views or needs are described at all. Or if we are counted, we're counted as one homogeneous group, as Asian Americans, for example, when in reality there's more than 50 different ethnicities within the AANHPI category, and these sort of broad generalizations about our community leads to this model minority myth. And I think that some people may mistake the model minority myth as being a positive sign, that perhaps that it is a sign of accomplishment or how far we've come, but I think really it's not. I think for two reasons. One is that it obscures the real needs within our communities. It really obscures the gaps we have within educational attainment, economic attainment, healthcare needs, but also it sort of seeks to, the people that sort of have started and really pushed this model minority myth are those who really are trying to seek to pit Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders as a wedge against other communities of color. And we think that one of the things we try to make clear within this policy platform is that we are seeking to claim our place and our space here as a community of color that's fighting for racial and social justice. And so in order to really see that and in order to really understand the needs of our community, we need more data, and we need more data that's disaggregated as much as possible, which means that it breaks out Asian Americans between Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Indian Americans, and so on. It breaks out Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders by Native Hawaiian and Samoan and Tongan and so on, and really captures the broad sense of what our needs are. The second overall theme is that we demand to be heard, which requires culturally and linguistically appropriate services, because 1/3 of Asian Americans and 9% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are limited English proficient, which means they have some difficulty in English communication. They can't speak or read or write English in a level that permits them to interact really well with the government and with service providers. And this, as you might imagine, is another area of concern that really covers the broad range of services and engagement in public life. And then the last one that's cross-cutting is that we demand a seat at the table. We believe that a democratic government has to reflect the diversity of the nation it serves at all levels. And so we want to make sure that as any administration comes in, from the entry-level political appointments to cabinet secretaries and federal judges and beyond, that there's really a broad diversity of people serving in these positions, and that they include Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. So those are three themes that sort of cross-cut across all issue areas. The rest of this platform covers 7 broad topics that I won't go into specifics, but you'll see here they include advancing civil rights, the priorities of the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community, reforming the immigration system, economic justice and affordable, stable housing, expanding educational opportunities, living healthy lives, and then how do we plan for our Asian communities. And what we want to do here is not only sort of describe some of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander priorities and sort of where it is that we have an AANPHI role, whether it's language access in voting rights, the profiling of South Asian and Muslim and Sikh and Arab Americans, whether it's specific health disparities or educational disparities that have an impact on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. But then the other part is to sort of show that we as a community are broadly engaged in all of these issues, and that we are here to be considered and should be considered, especially as reporters and people are thinking about communities of color. I think oftentimes that's sort of described as shorthand to really mean African American and Hispanic Americans, but really if you're going to say communities of color, what is the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander view, and is that being included, and how? And so there are issues that often don't get covered that we have a great interest in, such as criminal justice reform, immigration, surprisingly, again, despite the fact that there are more immigrants from Asian countries than from anywhere else. Pay equity is another one that has, if you look at the disaggregated data, is a specific impact on our community. Reproductive justice, sort of all of these conversations, the hope this platform, while it doesn't list all of our priorities, really is intended to show the breadth and scope of all of the issues that we're engaged in, and so we encourage people to look at that as a resource for how to cover our communities, but then also how to cover the broader debate and to make sure that our communities are considered within it. And so that is the broad overview of the platform, and obviously happy to take questions after that. But with that, I'm happy to turn it back to Mary.
Thanks, Chris. Now we are going to hear from Representative Judy Chu, Chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, KPAC.
Well, thank you so much. It's so great to be here with the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans and our esteemed members of the press to launch AANPHI's 2016 policy platform. I really have to commend Chris Kang and AANPHI for doing such an excellent job on this comprehensive Asian American platform. It comes during a critical election year where there is so much at stake for our community and our country. Yes, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are now the fastest growing racial population in the nation, not only in traditional strongholds like California, Hawaii, and New York, but all across the country, including in the South and Midwest, where our populations have increased exponentially over the past decade. Not only that, we're also one of the fastest growing swing votes in the country, including in important swing states like Nevada, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. If there was ever a time for the AAPI community to raise our voices, now is the time. Today, the ability for us to make a difference with our vote is enormous. Nationally, Asian Americans have doubled our voter registration numbers over the last decade from 2 to 4 million people. And by 2040, we will have doubled even those numbers. We are the sleeping giant. We saw this in Virginia, where Senator Mark Warner faced a tight race. It was the concentration of the AAPI vote for him that helped him achieve his victory. And that's why I like to say we've gone from being marginalized to being the margin of victory. Now, let me tell you why this is important. Because when AAPIs have a voice in this country, we can make a difference. We made a difference in protesting the offensive and stereotypical depiction last week of Fox News, which aired a segment on the O'Reilly factor during which Jesse Waters visited New York City's Chinatown to interview Chinese Americans on the upcoming presidential election. But rather than use this as an opportunity to create a greater understanding of the API community, it made a mockery out of AAPIs by interviewing individuals with limited English proficiency and making Asian Americans the butt of every joke. This coverage was not only lazy and offensive, but it shows us that even in 2016, stereotypes abound and persist for AAPIs. That's why I'm so glad that AANPHI has released its national report to show where AAPIs stand on a myriad of issues, from voting rights to education to jobs and the economy. AAPIs have clear policy preferences and beliefs on priorities that will move our community forward. This platform doesn't only highlight AAPI-specific issues like language access or the need to have more comprehensive and disaggregated AAPI data, but it also provides the AAPI perspective on many of the issues that we see reported about in the press, from immigration to criminal justice reform to pay equity to close the gender gap. You know, in 2016, it's unacceptable that the perspectives of AAPIs are so rarely included in mainstream media when we consistently see the input of African American and Hispanic communities. Take, for instance, the issue of immigration reform. Over 2/3 of Asian Americans are foreign-born, and more immigrants now come from Asia than any other region in the world. But not only that, Asian Americans are over 40% of those waiting in the family immigration visa backlog, and over 80% of those waiting in the employment visa backlog. We also account for 11% of the undocumented in this country. So immigration reform is clearly an issue that impacts our community, and yet we rarely see any media coverage on the API perspective on immigration, whether we're talking about comprehensive immigration reform legislation or President Obama's executive actions on immigration. And yet, we are so deeply affected by these policies. So this needs to change, and I urge all of the media on this call to use AANPHI's policy platform as a resource when you're reporting on different topics, whether it's immigration or voting rights or gun control. Because without this perspective, there is an incomplete narrative which leads to the type of racial stereotyping that we saw on Fox News. So thank you to AANPHI for releasing this important policy platform, and thanks to the press who are on today's call. As chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that these policy platforms are elevated and that the AAPI perspective is told. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Chu. Our final speaker will be Christine Chen, Executive Director of Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote.
Thank you, Mary. In 2016, we will witness the largest mobilization effort of Asian American Pacific Islanders voters seen in history, with local nonprofit partners who are implementing voter registration, education, and get out the vote activities in over 25 states. Asian American voters grew by more than 600,000 each cycle, while the number of Asian American eligible voters have grown by more than 1.2 million each cycle. We are issue-based voters. Based on our spring poll, jobs, economy, healthcare, and education continue to be top issues for Asian American Pacific Islander voters. And this platform demonstrates specific policy recommendations. When campaigns are looking for undecided voters and swing voters, they need to turn to the Asian American and Pacific Islander electorate. Our voters throw their vote based on how their relationship is with a particular candidate and how they stand on these issues. API Vote will be encouraging our local partners to use this platform during this election cycle and to ask candidates on their stance as it's related to these issues. Many of our partners are participating in candidate forums where these topics can be addressed. And then post-elections, we believe our community partners will be able to use this platform as a way to engage with their newly elected officials with these policy recommendations. With that, we encourage everyone to check out our website at www.apiavote.org/educate, where you can view the presidential campaigns addressed to the API community from this past August at the Presidential Candidate Forums, the Presidential Voter Guide that was created by the Asian American Advancing Justice, AJC, and other translated materials and resources to help prepare voters cast their vote this election cycle. We'll also be updating this page with the NCAPA platform. So thank you, and we look forward to the next 25 days until the election day. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. We're now going to open it up for a Q&A. Please enter your questions in the question box, or if you're on the phone, dial *6. Okay, our first question is from Matt Turner. Will there be further action regarding the Fox News segment?
Hi, this is Chris Kang. We are actively discussing sort of what next steps can be taken to really get a real apology from Fox News and the O'Reilly factor, and how to actually see some action beyond that. As you may have seen, the executive producer of the O'Reilly factor has agreed to meet with representatives from the Asian American Journalists Association and some other AAPI leaders, and I think that meeting is currently being set. And in the meantime, we're looking to see what else we can do to sort of take the next step. You may have seen that there was a Change.org petition that was sent to Fox News earlier this week with about 20,000 people signing on in about 3 days' time. And we're really looking to see what we can do to build off of that interest and outrage and really affect some change.
And I would like to say, this is Judy Chu, that in previous situations where we've had offensive comments, like for instance with the Jimmy Kimmel segment in which he allowed kids to say that all the Chinese should be killed, that we have pressed the networks for meetings in which we see what kind of efforts they're engaged in with regard to diversity. And these kinds of efforts have led to changes within their structures so that they have people assigned to try to ensure that their programming is more diverse, and that they also have more diverse people behind the scenes who can be more sensitive to the issues of Asian Americans. So I look forward to having more dialogue with Fox News, as well as other stations, on ensuring that they do not have these kind of offensive and stereotypical segments. Our
next question is from Victor Wang, and he asks, How can we use the Fox News segment to motivate the AAPI community to show up to the polls to vote? And Christine, do you want to take that?
Yes. So many times what voters are feeling is that they feel like they don't make the connections between the elections and an issue that's important to them. So seeing that there's been a lot of momentum behind the Fox News segment, what we need to do is actually effectively translate and to talk to voters that you're engaging with to make them realize that we can actually have elected officials and the media and others actually take notice when we vote, because when we come out in larger numbers, then they will also pay attention to us in other areas such as media. There's also ways that after the elections, I believe that there's going to be a lot more discussion about how we can actually continue to have discussions with the media and hold them accountable as we move forward, and to make sure that our news stories are really reflective of the diverse community that we have.
Okay, I think that is all the questions we have today. Thank you all for joining. A recording of this call will be available immediately following the call. And for further questions, you may contact us at nkappaonline.org, and you may also download the platform there. Thanks so much.